Hi, friends. So, you might not be able to count on a lot of things in life, but one thing is for certain sooner or later, working as a denture tech, one of these is going to come through the door. It's a pickup impression of a partial denture to add a tooth or to repair a partial, and the impression itself was done properly. But what happened is that the denture was taken out of the impression and the whole thing was poured up in stone. I'll be honest with you, working as a dental assistant back in the day, I've done things like this simply because I had a disconnect between the laboratory and the clinical situations. I didn't know any better. I didn't know how the procedures were done. That's why I think it's very important for the clinical staff to know the laboratory procedures, at least the basics of them. And also it is important for the lab techs to know how the clinical procedures are done. Well, I used to start pulling my hair out and just wouldn't know what to do. I would try to manipulate things and just make things overly complicated when something like this happened. And 9 times out of 10, I would just send the thing back and tell them to redo it. Fortunately enough, a few years back, I've met some wonderful, wonderful people, also through Facebook and in person, and very knowledgeable techs who have taught me quite a few things. And this is one of those things. So whenever a situation like this happens, there's no need to start freaking out. It's not the end of the world. What you basically do is you inspect the model that you get, and you make sure it's free of major voids. And if you have any of those major voids or major undercuts, go ahead, block them out with wax. Once that happens, go ahead and soak the models for about 10 minutes in water. I've heard anywhere from, I don't know, very cold water to very hot water. I just use water that comes out of the tap, put the model in there, soak it for about 10 minutes. I guess it is highly dependent on what kind of stone you're using, but I'm just using a type 3 modern material stone and I haven't had any issues. So you soak the models, then take the model out, pat it dry or use air gun to get rid of the excess moisture, and go ahead and find a tray that is the proper size for that proper model. Even if I'm using a lower model, I'm still going to use an upper tray because it makes things easier to take an impression off and also makes it easier to box up and pour up. Do you need to start boxing up your impressions when you're doing things like this? Absolutely not. Just because I'm a little bit wrong in the head doesn't mean everybody else has to be. I like boxing up impressions simply because I've done it long enough and it is easier for me to box it up and not having to worry about things. Because I don't like manipulating stone here and there. I know that I have that ring, I can just pour the stone up, and here we go. If you don't like doing that, if you just like pouring stuff into impression, more power to you. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Well, once I find the tray that I need and the models are properly soaked, I'll go ahead and mix up my Hydrogun 5 alginate. I've been told before, and I agree with that assessment, that if you have a very nice alginate mixer, it creates a nice and uniform mix and creates a much better impression. So if you're, for example, using alginate on daily basis in your laboratory to duplicate things, even though I don't, I would recommend you get an alginate mixer. I personally prefer to use silicone for duplication of the models, and lately I have been using digital protocols to print duplicates. But for situations like this, where I need a duplicate really, really quick, or I need to take an impression really, really quick, let's put it that way, using alginate is a nice and fast way of doing things. It doesn't have to be super precise, it just has to be good enough for this repair to be done. So you take the impression after mixing everything properly, you let it set up. Once it's all set up, you carefully will remove it. If you do not soak the models long enough, the model will absorb some of the moisture from the alginate and it will actually stick to the stone model. And other things you can also do besides soaking, you can also use silicone separation spray. Just go ahead and test a few things out. Depending on what type of stone you have and the environmental conditions in your lab, you might have to adjust your protocol slightly. For me, soaking the models works just fine. So you take the impression, you let it set the proper amount of time. I usually just let it sit there for about 5 minutes. Then I come in and I'll separate things. Once that is done, go ahead and take your partial denture, and hopefully if you did everything correctly, it should fit right into your impression. One of the things you have to watch out for is the regions around the clasps. And as you can see right here, I had to move a little bit of alginate from the clasp area just so the things are fitting all the way down. Are they going to seal 100%? No, they're not, because you take an impression of impression. Things are not 100% perfect. However, they're good enough for you to pour up another model. The model you'll be able to do a repair on, the model you'll be able to place another tooth on, do things that you need to do. Will it need to be slightly more adjusted? Probably, because you're probably going to be off in occlusion by another, I don't know, 0.5 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter. No, probably not 0.5 millimeter, about 1/4 millimeter or so. So it's not drastic. And when you're replacing 1 or 2 teeth, not a huge deal either. Well, at least it is to me. So once you place it in there, you can box it up. You don't have to box it up. Pour it up in a stone of your choosing. I prefer to use modern material number 3 stone because it's easier for me to do the repairs on. And also when I need to divest, it breaks up fairly easily. So I will pour up my stone, let it set for about, I don't know, half an hour. Go ahead, open up my magnetic ring, clean up my R-Time dough putty, trim up the model, and I'm ready to do the procedure that I need. All of that can be easily done in your laboratory, but one thing for sure, make sure you properly educate the clinical staff on this procedure, and also please charge for it. If it happens once or twice, it's not a big deal. I will usually not charge for things, but if it happens constantly, we don't need to deal with these kind of situations all the time, and we need to make sure we're well compensated for our labor. So please make sure you take care of yourself as well as everybody else. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and as always, good luck.